Level 1. Grizzly Man. He said he would die for the bears, and in the end, he did. Timothy Treadwell spent 13 summers living among grizzlies in Alaska. He filmed himself hugging them, talking to them, even believing he could protect them. But behind the smile, he was a failed actor, battling loneliness and addiction, using the wilderness as his escape. In 2003, his luck ran out. A bear attacked Timothy and his girlfriend. The camera was rolling, but only the audio exists. Director Werner Herzog described it as the most terrifying sound he'd ever heard. What makes the story chilling isn't just how he died, it's how inevitable it felt. Every scene of him playing with the animals feels like a countdown. He believed he was their guardian, but in the wild, he was only prey. What would you have told Timothy if you met him before that final summer?
They called him mostly harmless. Hikers knew him only as mostly harmless, no ID, no past, just a quiet man walking the trails. When his body was found in Florida's swamps in 2018, people online became obsessed with uncovering who he really was. Some thought he was sick, a wanderer escaping time, even a traveler from another world. But when the truth finally came out, it wasn't romantic at all. His name was Vance Rodriguez, a man with a history of pain, broken relationships, and inner battles most never saw. The online groups that once worshipped him fell apart. Fights broke out, people were accused. A stranger had become their hero, and when the illusion shattered, so did they. Imagine this. How much of someone's story can we ever really know when we all we see is what they choose to show us?
Level 2. Tickled. At first glance, tickled sounds harmless, almost funny. A New Zealand journalist, David Ferrier, stumbles across something called competitive endurance tickling. Videos of young men restrained and tickled for hours at a time. Quirky, weird, but maybe just a niche internet subculture. But when David tries to investigate, the story takes a very dark turn. The organization behind the videos, Jane O'Brien Media, bombards him with homophobic abuse, endless lawsuits, and threats to destroy his career. As the documentary unfolds, participants reveal the truth. Many were coerced or blackmailed into taking part. Some had their personal lives ruined when tapes were leaked to employers, friends, and family. Careers were destroyed, reputations shattered, all to keep them silent. David eventually traces it all back to one man, David D'Amato, a wealthy former school administrator with a long history of cybercrimes and harassment campaigns. For years, he used his power and money to trap young men, manipulate them, and keep critics terrified of speaking out. By the end, the film shifts from quirky curiosity to something much darker, a web of coercion, intimidation, and exploitation built on something as absurd as tickling. The final chilling twist? Even D'Amato's own stepmother admits his obsession and says she still fears what he might do. Bowling for Columbine. Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine is one of the most unsettling yet important documentaries on American gun culture. The film starts with the 1999 Columbine High School massacre, one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. But instead of just retelling the tragedy, Moore digs into the deeper question: why does America have so much gun violence compared to the rest of the world? The documentary mixes shocking real footage and emergency calls from the Columbine attack with scenes that almost feel absurd. For example, Moore walks into a bank and gets a free rifle just for opening an account. That's how easy it is to get a gun in America. Throughout the film, Moore challenges the common excuses for violence, like blaming music, movies, or video games. Instead, he points to systemic inequality, media-driven fear, and a culture that glorifies weapons. Even interviews with pro-gun figures are disturbing. Charlton Heston, then the president of the NRA, outright refuses to blame guns and instead blames America's mixed ethnicity. When it was released, Bowling for Columbine won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, but it also drew criticism. Some said Moore left out key details or exploited survivors to make his point. Still, looking back today, the documentary feels even more disturbing. School shootings have only grown more common in the US, and Moore's warning that America has built the perfect environment for this kind of domestic terrorism hits harder than ever. Kiboga. This documentary centers on Issei Sagawa, a Japanese man who became infamous in 1981 after killing and cannibalizing his Dutch classmate, René Hartfeldt, in Paris. Legally declared insane, Sagawa spent only 15 months in a psychiatric hospital before being released back to Japan. What followed was even more disturbing. He went on to profit from his crime through books, manga, and media appearances. Kiboga doesn't focus on the crime itself. Instead, it paints an intimate portrait of Sagawa's daily life, particularly his relationship with his brother, Jun. On the surface, it seems mundane, but the extreme close-ups of Sagawa's paralyzed face, combined with his calm recollections, make it deeply unsettling. Throughout the film, Sagawa shows little to no remorse. He reflects not on his victim's suffering, but on his own struggles and fears about his future. His artwork, disturbing graphic manga that depicts his violent fantasies, offers a chilling glimpse into his still active desires. Jun, his brother, is torn. He's not complicit, but he cannot sever ties. He condemns the crime, yet still loves the man who committed it. What makes Kiboga so disturbing is that it never tells the audience how to feel. It doesn't frame Sagawa as a monster, nor as a victim. It simply presents his life and leaves us with a horrifying choice. Do we condemn him outright, or do we feel sympathy for a man who openly identifies as a cannibal? That moral ambiguity is what lingers the most, and it's why Kiboga earns its place on this iceberg.
Level 3. Titty Cut Follies. This 1967 documentary by Frederick Wiseman takes us inside the Bridgewater State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Massachusetts. But it isn't a clinical study. It's raw, unfiltered footage of how inmates were really treated, and it's horrifying. The film shows patients locked in barren cells, often completely naked. Guards mock and taunt them while shaving their heads. One inmate is force-fed through a tube, while a staff member casually smokes a cigarette and lets the ash fall into his food. There are no interviews, no narration, just the stark reality of systemic cruelty, captured in black and white. The most disturbing part is that you, the viewer, are left with no distance. You simply have to watch. When the film was released, Massachusetts immediately banned it, claiming it violated patient privacy. But many believed the real reason was to cover up the state's own abuse. It became the first American film banned for reasons other than obscenity or national security. It stayed locked away until 1991. By then, most of the patients shown had already died. Today, Titty Cut Follies is preserved in the U.S. National Film Registry as a vital piece of history. It forced people to confront how institutions dehumanize the very people they're meant to protect. It's disturbing not because of gore or violence, but because it's all real, and it shows us what happens when power goes unchecked.
Voyeur. A documentary that feels more like a twisted confession than a film. The story follows Gerald Foss, a Colorado motel owner who secretly modified his property with hidden vents and an attic platform just so he could spy on his guests for decades. He claimed it wasn't about perversion, he called it a sociological study. But as he admits, he absolutely got personal pleasure from watching. The most disturbing part is, he once witnessed a violent assault in one of his rooms and did absolutely nothing to stop it. He just kept watching. The journalist at the center, Gay Talais, initially paints Foss as just a strange, quirky man. But as the documentary digs deeper, cracks in Foss's story start to show. Did all of this really happen the way he says? Or was he inflating his sick fantasies into something bigger? What makes Voyeur so unsettling isn't only Foss's lack of remorse, it's also how the film itself treats him. By giving him a platform, it almost glamorizes his crimes. Viewers are left with this chilling thought. How many people, completely unaware, had their most private moments stolen by a man who saw himself as an observer, not a predator? When Voyeur was released, Foss was condemned as a predator who exploited countless people. But surprisingly, much of the backlash also hit Gay Talais, the journalist who failed to verify Foss's claims and, in some eyes, gave legitimacy to a man who should have been remembered only for his abuse of power. In the end, Voyeur isn't just a story about one motel owner. It's a story about how easy it can be to blur the line between documenting evil and enabling it.
Three Identical Strangers. In 1980, a college freshman named Bobby Shafran walked onto campus for the first time. Almost immediately, strangers began greeting him as if they already knew him. Confused, Bobby soon learned the truth. He wasn't being mistaken for just anyone. He was the spitting image of another student, Eddie Gallant. When the two finally met face to face, the resemblance was undeniable. They were identical twins, separated at birth. The story exploded in the media. Two brothers reunited after nearly 2 decades. But the real shock was still to come. A few months later, a third young man named David Kellman saw the news. He looked exactly like Bobby and Eddie. Against all odds, the three realized they weren't twins, they were triplets, all adopted into different families, never told the truth. The documentary, Three Identical Strangers, digs into the joyful reunion that quickly darkened into something sinister. It turned out the triplets had been separated deliberately, not by chance, but as part of a secret psychological experiment. The adoption agency had struck a deal with psychiatrist Peter Neubauer, who wanted to study nature versus nurture. Each boy was placed into a different type of household, one wealthy, one middle class, one working class. None of the adopted parents were told their child was part of an experiment. As the film unfolds, we see the cost of that decision. All three boys grew up with deep separation anxiety as infants, banging their heads, holding their breath. As adults, they face struggles with depression, anger, and identity. Tragically, one of the brothers, Eddie, took his own life in 1995. To this day, the full result of the experiment remains sealed until the year 2065. The surviving brothers still don't know the complete truth of why their lives were torn apart. And that's what makes Three Identical Strangers so disturbing. It isn't just a story about family, it's about how vulnerable human lives were treated as test subjects, their happiness sacrificed in the name of science.
The Red Chapel. In 2006, Danish journalist Mads Brugger and two Danish-Korean comedians, Jacob Nozzle and Simon Jewell, traveled to North Korea under the guise of a cultural exchange program. Officially, they claimed to be a theater troupe, but their real mission was to secretly critique the regime's propaganda machine. From the very start, everything is under strict state control. The group performs comedy sketches, but the censors reshape their acts into pro-government propaganda. Even Jacob's disability is hidden during performances to preserve the illusion of perfection in North Korea. At first, it seems almost absurd, like satire inside a dictatorship. But the deeper it goes, the darker it gets. Jacob begins to feel morally torn, realizing he is being used as part of the spectacle. Things reach a breaking point when he's forced to attend a massive rally, surrounded by thousands saluting Kim Jong-il. Unlike everyone else, Jacob refuses to raise his hand. Behind the scenes, Mads Brugger faces his own moral collapse. To keep the team safe, he lies to their hosts, mistranslates Jacob's words, and exploits his collaborators, essentially becoming just as manipulative as the regime he's mocking. The Red Chapel leaves audiences deeply conflicted. On the surface, it exposes the absurdity of North Korea's propaganda, but beneath that, it raises uncomfortable questions. How far should a filmmaker go for the truth, and at what cost to the people around him?
Jesus Camp. This documentary takes us inside an evangelical Christian summer camp for children. Here, young kids are trained to become fervent soldiers of faith, taught that the world is full of sin and that they must fight it with unwavering devotion. The camp's leaders preach extreme ideas, encouraging children to pray in ways that many viewers find disturbing. Watching Jesus Camp is unsettling because it exposes how innocence can be manipulated. These are children, impressionable and trusting, being immersed in intense religious indoctrination. The documentary doesn't sensationalize, it simply shows the reality of what's happening, letting the audience confront the ethical and emotional implications themselves. By the end, viewers are left questioning the boundaries between faith, influence, and exploitation. It's a level of institutional horror that stays with you long after the credits roll, and it's a stark reminder that sometimes the darkest parts of humanity hide behind seemingly ordinary institutions.
Good Night, Sugar Babe. This documentary tells the tragic story of Vera Jo Rigel, a young woman whose life was brutally cut short. It explores not just the events surrounding her murder, but also the environment that allowed such abuse to persist. The filmmakers carefully reveal the systemic failures, showing how neglect and indifference compounded the tragedy. Watching Good Night, Sugar Babe is a chilling experience. It forces viewers to confront the reality of human cruelty and the devastating consequences of betrayal and unchecked violence. It's a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing documentaries aren't about distant horrors, but the ones that happen within families and communities we think we understand. The Last Stop. This film exposes the brutal reality of a so-called behavior modification school for troubled teens. Behind the walls, what was supposed to be therapy often turned into punishment. Students were subjected to harsh discipline, isolation, and psychological abuse, all under the guise of helping them reform. Families sent their children there hoping for guidance and care, only to find them trapped in a system that prioritized control over compassion. Watching The Last Stop is disturbing because it forces us to confront the consequences of unchecked authority. It raises difficult questions about how society treats its most vulnerable, and how easily abuse can hide under the label of education or rehabilitation. This documentary doesn't just show suffering, it challenges us to think about morality, power, and responsibility in institutional settings.
Level 4. Our Father. You take a DNA test and suddenly discover dozens of siblings you never knew existed. That's what happened to Jacoba Ballard. At first, she thought the test was wrong, but the more she looked, the more names kept appearing. 7 half-siblings, then 10, then 20. And they all shared one link: an Indianapolis fertility doctor named Donald Klein. From the 1970s through the 2000s, Patients came to him for help starting families. What they didn't know was that Klein was secretly inseminating them with his own DNA. The documentary Our Father follows Jacoba's search for answers. Her siblings gather, piecing together the scale of Klein's deception. Each new test result is a chilling reminder this wasn't an accident, it was systematic. Reenactments show how the procedures happened: cold, clinical, invasive. Survivors recount the betrayal of discovering that the man they trusted most violated them in ways they never imagined. And when confronted, Klein showed no remorse. Recordings play where his voice is dismissive, almost smug. For him, it was just routine. Even worse, the legal system failed them. Back then, fertility fraud wasn't even a crime in Indiana. Klein faced nothing more than a fine and the loss of his license. No prison, no real justice. Viewers were outraged. Families broken, lives changed forever. And the chilling part? Without stricter laws, it could happen again.
Holy hell. Imagine joining a community that promises peace, healing, and love, only to discover it's hiding something sinister. At first, it looked perfect. A group of young people in 1980s Hollywood, dancing in fields, meditating, building what seemed like a utopia. All of it led by a charismatic man named Michel. He called himself enlightened. To his followers, he was a spiritual master. But paradise doesn't stay pure for long. The deeper people got, the more control Michel demanded. Followers were pressured into isolation, cut off from family and friends. He enforced celibacy, manipulated emotions, and used healing sessions that blurred the line between devotion and exploitation. And here's the disturbing part. The proof was captured on camera. One of his devoted followers, Will Allen, was the cult's videographer. For more than 20 years, he filmed everything. Smiling faces, spiritual rituals, and eventually the dark side no one dared question. Michel told them, "If you can stand before your master, you can stand before God." To many, it was gospel. To outsiders, it was manipulation. Former members describe how he demanded absolute loyalty while exploiting the very people who trusted him most. Yet on the tapes, he's always smiling, calm, untouchable. And Will? For decades, he was part of it, spreading the very propaganda that pulled others in. When he finally left, he turned his footage into this documentary. Some see it as exposing the truth, others see it as him trying to excuse his own complicity. So the question lingers. Was this film a warning about cults, or a confession from someone who helped build one? What do you think? Can someone spend 22 years filming lies and still call themselves a victim?
Children underground. Imagine children living where rats run instead of pets, under the city itself. This is Children Underground. Bucharest, Romania. 5 kids, ages 8 to 16, not in school, not in homes, but hidden beneath the streets, sleeping in subway tunnels. By day they beg, by night they huddle in dark corners, clinging to each other. To escape hunger, pain, memories, they inhale paint from plastic bags. One girl fled a violent orphanage. Another boy ran from an alcoholic father. Every story begins with neglect and ends under the ground. The camera doesn't look away. You see them giggling, then gasping, then slumping after sniffing. You hear them talk about dreams, knowing they'll never come true. At one point, a fight breaks out. A child beaten, crying, ignored. The filmmaker just keeps rolling. And you wonder, would I have stepped in? That's what makes this film so hard to watch. It shows society's apathy, while the camera mirrors it. We don't intervene, we just watch. Decades later, the update is grim. Some children became parents, only to lose their own kids. Others vanish into poverty. Their stories fade, but the footage stays. What would you do, watch or act, if you saw a child living like this? And if this unsettled you, wait until you see the next story.
The family I had, imagine losing both of your children in a single night. That's exactly what happened to one mother. Paris Bennett was just 13. His little sister, Ella, only 4. One evening, in a sudden fit of rage, Paris ended her life. At first, he appeared broken with guilt. Behind bars, he spoke softly, almost regretful. But then his tone changed. His words grew cold, calculated, almost proud. One thing I accept is that I'm sane. And with that, he revealed what terrified everyone: the possibility he would do it again. The documentary forces us to sit with the family's grief. His mother, Charity, describes the moment she realized her daughter was gone and that her son was the one responsible. But as the story unravels, something darker surfaces. This wasn't the first tragedy. Charity's own childhood was scarred by violence. Her father murdered, her mother accused of arranging it. A pattern of pain repeating through generations. And yet, no one seems to take responsibility.
Charity mourns Ella but never fully blames Paris. The family circles around grief, but never accountability. That's what makes it so disturbing, because you're left asking yourself, was this fate, or could it have been stopped? What do you think? Are monsters born, or are they created by the lives they inherit?
Level 5. The Gift. Imagine someone wanting the very virus the world spent decades fearing. That's the premise of The Gift. A subculture of men who deliberately seek out infection, chasing it like it's some twisted prize. At first, it feels unthinkable. Survivors of the epidemic speak of loss, guilt, and pain. Entire generations gone. Medications keeping others alive, but leaving scars, physical and emotional. Yet here are men gathering at underground parties. No protection, no fear. Some call it empowerment. Others say it frees them from the anxiety of if. Because once it happens, there's nothing left to fear. One man even smiles as he admits he's happy. He says, "Now I don't have to worry anymore." But the camera doesn't let you forget what the virus has done. The side effects, the funerals, the isolation of those left behind. The documentary raises a disturbing contradiction. Is this reckless rebellion, or a symptom of trauma too deep to heal? It shocked audiences. Activists condemned it for fueling dangerous stereotypes. Others argued it exposed a truth too real to ignore. Because these men exist, and their choices ripple outward to anyone who crosses their path. So I'll ask you this. If fear was crushing you every day, would you rather live with it or run straight into it?
The act of killing. What if killers were asked to act out their crimes as if they were the stars of a movie? That's exactly what The Act of Killing does, one of the most disturbing documentaries ever made. It takes us back to Indonesia in the 1960s, during a brutal purge where over 1 million people were silenced. But instead of hearing from survivors, this film hands the camera to the men who carried it out. They don't confess, they perform. Gang leaders and death squad members proudly recreate their acts, only this time in the style of the Hollywood films they worship. Westerns, noir thrillers, even musicals. One man explains, almost casually, how he strangled people with wire to avoid leaving blood behind. And then he laughs, smiles, struts for the camera. It's not just disturbing, it's surreal. Fireworks explode during mass massacres. Children scream while the perpetrators play heroes. And all the while, they believe they're being celebrated. But something shifts. One of the men begins to gag while revisiting a killing site. His body remembers what his conscience won't admit. Still, no real remorse ever comes. The movie leaves you shaken. It's not about justice. It's about what happens when evil tells its own story and enjoys it. So here's the question. If you had the chance to make a monster act out their own crimes, would you watch? And if you think this was unsettling, wait until you see what's lurking deeper in the iceberg.
Mondo Cane.
In 1962, a strange documentary hit theaters. At first glance, it looked like a tour around the world. Exotic places, local rituals, curious traditions. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely. Mondo Cane, a so-called documentary that stitched together shocking scenes from across the globe. One moment, you're watching a tribe preparing women for marriage by force-feeding them until they can barely stand. The next, you're shown animals being slaughtered in crowded markets, sharks pulled from the ocean, geese force-fed until their stomachs swell. There's no comfort here, no context, just horror paraded as culture. And the narration? Cold, mocking, comparing civilized Western life to what it called primitive rituals. A sneering voice that told viewers what to think without ever questioning the cruelty of what was shown. The most disturbing part? Many of the scenes weren't even real. Critics later revealed that some of the most brutal moments were staged or manipulated to shock audiences. That means actual animals were killed just to make a movie more grotesque. People walked out of theaters sickened. Animal rights groups called it exploitation. And yet, Mondo Cane became a worldwide hit. In fact, it spawned an entire genre of shockumentaries, where suffering was turned into entertainment. Think about that. a film that blurred the line between reality and fiction and made cruelty into a spectacle. And here's the unsettling question. Was it exposing hidden truths or simply exploiting them for profit?
Level 6. Glory. Imagine choosing people like items in a store. That's what happens inside Thailand's fish tank brothels. Women sit behind glass, marked by numbers instead of names. Clients point, money decides who leaves the tank. The documentary Glory doesn't soften what it shows. No narration, no interviews, just raw life inside three corners of the world's darkest trade: Thailand, Bangladesh, and Mexico. In Bangladesh, you hear a madam haggle over a girl's body like she's selling livestock. Children trapped, debts they'll never escape. Mexico is worse. Graphic acts, addiction, and decay filmed with no filter. Thailand looks polished at first. Bright lights, clean glass, smiling faces. But it's an illusion. Behind that glass is the same despair. None of these women are there by choice. Poverty left them no other option. The hardest part? The film is beautifully shot. Dramatic lighting, haunting music, almost romantic. It feels wrong, like the suffering is being dressed up for the screen. But maybe that's the point, to show us how easy it is to consume someone else's pain like entertainment. If you saw this life through glass, would you look away or would you keep watching?
Africa, adio. When freedom came to Africa, filmmakers claimed it wasn't freedom at all, it was chaos. That's the opening claim of Africa Adio, a 1966 documentary that still sparks outrage today. Two Italian directors traveled through Kenya, Zanzibar, Congo, and South Africa. On the surface, they said they wanted to capture Africa's transition from colonial rule to independence. But what they created was far darker. The film shows brutal scenes, massacres, poaching, executions, beaches littered with bodies, villages wiped out, even baby elephants killed for ivory. The narration makes a chilling argument that decolonization wasn't liberation, but a collapse into savagery. And that's where the real horror lies. Many African leaders called it racist propaganda because instead of celebrating independence, it framed Africans as violent and incapable of governing themselves. Some scenes were so shocking that critics believe they were staged, especially the animal killings. The United Nations condemned the movie. Countries banned it. Even today, nobody really knows how much of it was real and how much was fabricated. But one thing is clear. Africa Adio wasn't just a documentary, it was a statement, a disturbing suggestion that Africa would have been better off under colonial rule. That's why it remains one of the most unsettling films ever made.
Sound of torture. Imagine this. Your phone rings, you answer, and on the other end, it's your loved one. But they're not calling to say hello. They're screaming for their life. That's the reality shown in Sound of Torture. The story follows Eritrean refugees kidnapped in the Sinai Desert, held by smugglers, forced to call their families while being tortured in the background. Ransom or death, that's the choice. One journalist, Marin Estefanos, becomes their voice. On her radio show, she plays the calls. The world listens as mothers beg, as children cry, as hostages scream through the line. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. Women giving birth while chained, kids locked away, their shoes scattered outside desert camps, and graves, hundreds of them, hidden in the sand. Even escape isn't freedom. Survivors who make it to the border are shot by soldiers, silenced again. There's no narration trick, no dramatic editing, just raw voices, suffering that feels impossible to ignore. And yet the world turned away. Borders closed, governments stalled, thousands left behind. To this day, the calls echo, people crying out, and no one there to answer. What would you do if the phone rang and it was them? Stay tuned, because the next story will take us even deeper into the iceberg.
Conspiracy of silence. Some stories are too dangerous to tell. This is one of them. A filmmaker planned to expose a network of powerful people. They trafficked children and hid their crimes. The plan was bold, but the film never aired. Political pressure stopped it. Only a few copies escaped. They circulate quietly online. Viewers report fear and shock. Some question if the footage is real. Others wonder what was hidden. The documentary shows crimes that people in power wanted kept secret. Faces are blurred, names changed, but the danger feels real. Every clip is tense. Every moment raises questions. Watching it forces a choice: stay away or face the truth. The silence around it is louder than the images.
Level 7. Junk films. Imagine a film with no story, no heroes, and no comfort. That is what junk films is. It throws viewers into a world of raw death and decay. The footage shows corpses, rituals, and decomposition. There are no explanations, no narration, and no guiding voice. You are left alone with what you see. Every image is shocking. Every frame forces you to face mortality directly. The films come from obscure sources. Some are amateur recordings, others taken from ritual sites or accident scenes. There is no attempt to dramatize or add meaning. Scenes are long, often lingering on details most people would look away from. You see bodies in various states of decay. You see human suffering without relief or context. It feels like a confrontation rather than entertainment. Viewers react differently. Some call it art, a way to study death without pretending it is beautiful. Others see exploitation, taking shock for shock's sake. The line between truth and sensationalism is thin. The lack of narrative leaves interpretation entirely to the audience. You are forced to ask why you are watching. What is the point of seeing this? Are you witnessing reality or participating in a voyeuristic act? The power of junk films comes from its honesty and its brutality. There are no edits to soften the images, no music to guide your feelings. The images hit raw and unfiltered. You are left unsettled, thinking about life, death, and the human fascination with both. Watching it is not easy. Most cannot handle more than a few minutes. Yet those who watch me feel a strange clarity. Life is fragile, death is certain, and the choice to look or to turn away is yours. In junk films, there is no middle ground.
Just Melvin, just evil. Some monsters live among us. Some hide behind family ties. Just Melvin, just evil, tells one such story. Melvin just was a man whose life was full of darkness. He abused his own children for decades. The abuse went on quietly, hidden from the outside world. His victims carried deep wounds, both physical and mental. Fear kept them silent. Shame kept the secrets alive. The filmmaker returns to confront Melvin. He is old, calm, and unapologetic. Watching him speak, it becomes clear the guilt never touched him. The family, torn apart, struggles to cope. Siblings who survived carry trauma that shapes their lives. Some fall into addiction. Others live in constant fear. The camera captures their pain without sugarcoating it. The community around them stayed silent. Neighbors suspected but didn't act. Authorities were slow, hesitant, or unwilling to intervene. That silence allowed abuse to continue longer than it should have. The film asks a hard question. Why do families protect the guilty even when the truth is in front of them? Footage shows family events, funerals, and small moments of ordinary life. But the ordinary is heavy with the weight of what happened behind closed doors. Melvin's presence looms over every frame. His charm, calm voice, and ordinary face make the horror harder to accept. Evil here is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, it is patient, it is close. The victims speak directly, telling their stories with courage. Their pain is raw, sometimes breaking their voices. The audience feels their fear, their anger, and their sorrow. Silence, neglect, and protection of the abuser emerge as the real villains. By the end, the film leaves no comfort. It does not promise justice. It only forces the viewer to ask, how could this happen? How can we stop it? And why do some families protect the guilty even when the truth is in front of them?
Capturing the Friedmans shows a family filled with laughter, games, and family dinners, but behind the smiles, chaos brews. Capturing the Friedmans shows a family caught in a storm they never expected. Arnold Friedman, a mild-mannered father, is accused of child abuse. His son Jesse also faces charges. The accusations shock their quiet suburban town. Neighbors whisper. Friends question what they once believed. Home videos play a major role. They show birthday parties, homework help, and silly family antics. But these same tapes also reveal arguments, tension, and strange behavior. The footage blurs the line between innocence and guilt. Watching the videos, you feel the family's love and fear at the same time. The camera captures joy, shame, and confusion in one frame. Courtroom scenes reveal the strain on the family. Lawyers argue, witnesses testify. Arnold and Jesse maintain different versions of events. Each story raises more questions than answers. The community struggles to understand. Some people believe the boys were victims of hysteria. Others see truth in the accusations. The uncertainty presses on everyone, even years later. The film never fully answers what happened. Instead, it shows the impact of suspicion and accusation. The Friedmans' lives are changed forever. Relationships fracture, trust disappears, family members live with doubt and guilt. The audience is left to decide who to believe. Watching it feels uncomfortable. You see both love and destruction in one household. Capturing the Friedmans forces viewers to confront uncertainty. It questions memory, bias, and the power of evidence. It asks whether truth is always clear. The story is unsettling, sad, and human. You leave thinking about how fragile families can be. It is a portrait of ordinary people trapped in extraordinary circumstances where laughter and fear coexist and nothing feels safe anymore.